Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Om Parthaya Pradibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Graditam Puranamunina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaidamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatva Manusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraika Panaye Jnana Mudraya Krishnaya Gita Amrita Duhe Namaha Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogda Gopala Nandanaha Partho Vatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gita Amritam Mahata Vasudeva Sudam Devam Kamsa Chanura Mardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. After a long hiatus, we are resuming the Gita class. In the last class on June 16th, we finished the 17th chapter, but we skipped the usual summary of the chapter since we needed more now to remember what we learned 3 months ago. So tonight's class will start with that missing summary of chapter 17. Arjuna started the chapter with his question, which arose from what Krishna said in the last verse of chapter 16. Krishna said, "Therefore let the Shastra, the scriptures, be your only authority in ascertaining what should be done and what should not be done. Understanding what is said in the scriptures, perform action as they ordain." In other words, whatever we do, even our sadhana, our spiritual practices, it should be based on the do's and don'ts of spirituality. And the source for that is the scriptures. For us, Amma's words are the highest scriptures, so we start there and supplement with the traditional scriptures wherever needed. So combined, the scriptures and Amma's words should represent the guidelines governing our life. This being the gist of what Krishna says, Arjuna starts to wonder, what if someone is a good and faithful person, but is ignorant of the scriptures? We can say, we can add to it as Amma's devotees, what if they haven't met Amma, and what if they don't know any of her teachings? What kind of a seeker will they be? Will they be considered to be sattvic, pure, rajasic, hyperactive, or tamasic, lazy seekers? So Krishna's response to that question of Arjuna's, that comprised verse 2 to 6. And Krishna segregated all activities into 3 types, according to the 3 types of faith. If a person is ignorant of spirituality, especially the scriptures, their so-called faith will be governed by their mental nature. their normal disposition, their temperament, their vasanas, their likes and dislikes. So the mental nature, or what is called swabhava, also is threefold. Dominantly sattvic nature, dominantly rajas, or dominantly tamas. If you think about it, even atheists have their beliefs. They might say like, I think this political party is best. Or I think the national budget should be used like this. They have all kinds of beliefs. And such beliefs are just another way of expressing their faith. Thus, everybody has something they believe in, and it is the details of our own belief system that determine our actions and self-expression. The key point is that the nature of our mind is the determining factor, not only regarding our faith, but in all areas of life. This is why the rest of the entire chapter of chapter 17, that was Krishna responding to Arjuna's question from a wide variety of standpoints. Standpoints that, Arjuna wouldn't have imagined. Like in the morning when we watch Amma's the live stream, and like 2 days ago, I believe it was, when Brahmacharini, who looked to be fairly young, was giving a satsang, and I think took Amman about 2 minutes to start giving her additional points to add into her satsang. And so we could call them bonus teaching or like extra, unsolicited teachings, but very necessary teachings. So the same thing happened to me in Faridabad. You might have been watching it. I was saying that Amma was so compassionate that, when Swami flushed the ants down the toilet, or down the sink, Amma was so upset with her. Just because she said the ants are her children too, and they need to eat something. So it's not how we think about ants, I guess. But when we were talking about that, Amma added in some points about how these we call kolam or padmam, or it looks kind of like a Buddhist mandala with powders. It's made for the pujas, and even in regular households, some places they will draw those with rice powder or turmeric powder every day. So Amma says that that's part of the culture, and also it becomes an offering to the creatures of nature, especially insects and especially ants. So it's a way of serving nature, bhuta yajna. So she adds in these points which we didn't think of, but it's necessary to understand all these things. So she did that, and this is what Krishna is going to do, or did, in chapter 17. A lot of bonus teachings. So in verse 7 through 22, Krishna covered 4 topics. These are surely topics that we too need to hear. And that was food, worship, austerity, and charity. And again, in the context of the 3 gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. Then, from verse 23 to 27, Krishna discussed the meaning of the mantra Om Tat Sat. It is actually only the meaning of Sat that matters. So he gave 5 meanings to that one very short word, Sat. You can review the chapter to get those definitions. But he didn't touch on the purpose of the mantra. He said, just this is how you should do it. And but it is explained in the commentaries of Shankaracharya and others what the purpose is. And they say that if a person has faith and devotion, but not knowledge of rules and regulations, they may inadvertently commit many mistakes. So how can a devotee make up for their mistakes? That method is presented here as chanting the Om Tat Sat mantra, and Shankaracharya explained the kind of attitude we should have. So for us as Amma devotees, we would just chant our mantra. I've made a lot of mistakes, Amma, please cancel all those and I'm just going to chant my mantra and to purify myself in my offerings. In the very last verse of chapter 17, which was verse 28, Krishna concludes by emphasizing the value of Shraddha, which means faith in Sanskrit. You may have encountered Shraddha in a different context where it means attention to detail, concentration, awareness. That is more of the Malayalam meaning of Shraddha. Amma says that actually they're both the same. Having focus, concentration is the same as faith and vice versa. But just here it means faith particularly. And without that faith or Shraddha, it doesn't matter how big, ornate, or elaborate a ritual may be, it is spiritually useless. People may say, oh wow, that guy's great. But spiritually it has no value at all. It won't render anything in this world or in the next spiritually. So the main advice that we are given throughout chapter 17 is that we should always strive for sattva guna, whether it's food, worship, austerity, charity, and other things as well. These are just a few examples. Everything should be connected to that. So connecting chapter 17 with the previous chapter 16, when we say we're striving for sattva guna, we would say it is the divine wealth. That divine wealth is increasing in us. And the opposite is also true. By avoiding rajas and tamas, the demonic, so-called demonic qualities within us will reduce. And demonic qualities don't necessarily mean that you're just a horrible, murderer or something like that. It's more like the anger in us, the jealousy, all these things that we want to get rid of, but we struggle to relinquish. These are also demonic. It's just a way of referring to them. But from chapter 17, what we understand is that instead of trying to memorize the 50 plus virtues that Krishna has enumerated so far, we just need to keep in mind the importance of sattva and strive for that. Sattva is a symbol of all the qualities that we need to cultivate. And for us, that means Amma. So if an Amma devotee says, I want to be like Amma, they're saying in another way, they're saying, I want to be pure, I want to be sattvic. But we don't use that so much. But in the Gita and other scriptures, that these terms come up a lot. So when someone says sattva, you can just imagine Amma. And looking at the structure of this last section of the Gita, remember the Gita has 18 chapters and they're broken down into 3 sections of 6 chapters each. So obviously we're in the last section, which is chapter 13 to 18. And we see that the first 3 chapters, 13 to 15, concentrate on what is called Brahma Vidya. Brahma Vidya, it means just the highest truth. That truth that we are one with God and there's nothing else. And then in chapters 16 and 17, Krishna, or the topic, concentrates on what is called Yoga Shastra, which is simply the application of that highest truth. It's the practicals of reaching that state. Now, with both topics covered, what is the purpose of having another chapter, of chapter 18? Much like chapter 2, which was a summary, chapter 18 is also a summary of the whole teaching, but a much more comprehensive one. So let us step into chapter 18 straight away. And we have short commentaries from both Shankaracharya and Jnaneshwara. So, Shankaracharya's excerpt that I've chose is, This chapter proceeds to set out, by way of summary, the import of the entire Gita and also the import of the Veda in its entirety. So it is said that the Bhagavad Gita is the essence of the Vedas. He's just reaffirming that. And then he says, indeed, the teaching contained in all the preceding chapters is understood through this chapter. So we really have to pay attention to understand. If you missed the earlier parts of this class, over the past, how many years? I don't know, maybe 8 years, I guess. This chapter will help you fill in the gaps. And Jnaneshwar has a very long, as usual, narration, but I feel because it's coming at the beginning of this chapter, it's good for us all to hear it. And I have reduced it a lot, but I'm going to be reading quite a bit, and it gives us a idea of where this chapter fits in the whole study of the Gita. First, this is before they even get to the first verse. They're giving like their own introductions to this final chapter. And this is what Jnaneshwara has to say. After again and again in praising his Guru and God for pages and pages, he says, in how many ways should I compose your songs, grouping words in diverse systems in praise of you, whose specialty can neither be known nor uttered in words. He's just explaining, Amma. Whatever adjectives I may use, they do not adequately represent your true nature. The sea's fame lasts only until the moon rises. The moonstone itself doesn't secrete water in worship of the moon. It is the moon that makes the moonstone secrete. As the salt does not sustain its crystal form, but gets dissolved as soon as water touches it, I entirely forget myself in your remembrance. You have reduced me to such a stage by scattering my I-ness, my sense of I. You have scattered my I-ness to the winds and have made my tongue mad with the singing of your praise. Were I to sing your praise, maintaining my individual consciousness, it would be debased by the false distinction, such as the quality itself or the one qualified. As a matter of fact, you are the one single supreme self, and in you, how can I make any distinction such as quality and the one qualified? Is it advisable to cut a pearl into two halves and then rejoin them? Or just keep the pearl intact as it is? You understand the symbolism, I hope. It's so beautiful. I thus see no scope in this world to praise you properly. You do not permit yourself to be decorated with any kind of ornament, but one of utter silence on my part. In other words, the only way you can make an ornament to Amma is just be silent. Silence constitutes your praise. Doing no action is your worship. And getting merged in you after nullifying one's personality means real association with you. Now you should put a firm seal in the form of the Gita teachings on my expansive talk that would please the minds of the righteous listeners. Now, O God, do attend to the composition. This chapter is the very pinnacle constructed of the heavenly gems in the form of interpretations of the Gita temple, studded with gems that will guide you to a direct vision of the Gita teachings. The top of the Gita temple is ordinarily discerned from a distance, and with its vision, God Himself inside the temple is considered to be viewable. The reading of this chapter alone brings the entire Gita teachings within our grasp. Naturally, a great and skillful architect, Sage Vyasa, who is the author of the Mahabharata, if you didn't know that, and the Gita comes in the Mahabharata, Sage Vyasa excavated a quarry in the rocky plain in the form of the Upanishads, on the mountain of the gems in the form of the Vedas. From this excavation became available an unlimited supply of rubble in the form of the three objects of life, Artha, Kama, Dharma, which means security, pleasure, and Dharma, with which he built a big fortification around the rocky plain in the form of the great epic Mahabharata. The rocky plain in the form of self-knowledge was then swept clean and clear with great skill in the form of the dialogue between Arjuna and Lord Krishna. Built thus on the cleared ground, the temple structure was completed with 15 layers in the form of 15 chapters. Chapter 16 provided a dome for fixing the suspended temple bell, while chapter 17 provided the framework upon which the spire is situated. Next comes chapter 18, the spire fixed over this basic frame, over which remains hoisted Sage Vyasa's flag in the form of the Gita. By the way, they don't include chapter 1 because there's no teachings from Krishna in chapter 1. So they're counting only 17 total chapters. Therefore, all the previous chapters constitute the stories or layers raised one over the other, their completion being evidenced by the present chapter. At the end of chapter 17, Arjuna thought, there are so many obstructions in the way of successful action. Then how can those given to restlessness become emancipated? One should be free from the shackles of restlessness, mentally relinquish actions altogether, and take to complete renunciation, which is free from sin. It would be desirable to ask Lord Krishna to clarify the aspects of sannyasa and tyaga, which bring about moksha if followed. Thus Partha asked Lord Krishna to enlighten him on the topic, and the Lord's response comes in chapter 18. Arjuna was truly love incarnate. That being the case, he felt miserable at Lord Krishna's silence. Arjuna was enjoying the direct vision as one sees one's own face in a mirror through the medium of the dialogue of the highest metaphysical reality. So when the dialogue came to an end, the experience of bliss also came to a dead stop. Having been enamored of it, how could Arjuna bear to see that happiness stop? Therefore, on his plea for further explanation in regard to sannyasa and tyaga, Lord Krishna resumed. The 18th is not a chapter. It is the entire Gita condensed in one chapter. When the calf itself begins to suck the cow's udders, how can the cow delay in releasing her milk? In that way, Arjuna called back the Gita as it was nearing its end. And this shows how a guru, Krishna, indulges their servants in innocent words. So here I would like to share an excerpt from Awakened Children. It's volume 4 and starts on page 200. There's a question that the brahmachari asks, and Amma gave a long response, but I'm just going to read the question and then tell you what happened later on. So a brahmachari asked a question, Amma, you said that the guru never hurts anyone, but you scold us sometimes and we feel hurt. And then Amma gave a long response about this concept of feeling like you've been hurt by the guru. Obviously, it's not true, but that's how this brahmachari felt. This is a long time ago, decades ago. When Amma stopped, the brahmachari who talked about feeling hurt felt very ashamed of himself. He said in a remorseful voice, "Amma, I seek your forgiveness for making that comment. I was not protesting." He paused. His throat choked up. With tears in his eyes, he continued, "Amma, please do not stop correcting me. Please continue to do that. I just wanted to say that even though I knew your chastisement was for my spiritual growth, they caused a little pain due to my ego. Forgive me for my faults. Forgive me, my Amma." Filled with remorse, the brahmachari could not control his emotions as he tried to wipe his tears. What followed was another display of Amma's overflowing compassion for her child. Amma's eyes also filled with tears, due to the brahmachari's innocence. Her all-enveloping love showered upon him as she put him on her lap and patted his back with great affection. Amma wiped his tears and slowly lifted him up from her lap, putting his head on her shoulders. Keeping his head there, she spoke to him soothingly. "Son, there was nothing wrong in your question. In fact, Amma liked your frankness. It is said that one should present questions to the Guru like confronting a cobra." That's an interesting comparison. A cobra keeps its head folded most of the time, but if you hit it, immediately it will unfold its hood. The more you provoke it, the more it will unfold its hood. Similarly, when you ask the Guru questions, be demanding of him or her here. By asking provocative questions, you will get more profound answers. You have the courage to do that first. A sincere, inquisitive seeker will spontaneously ask questions. One should not fabricate arduous questions just for the sake of asking. The determining factor is the questioner's inner thirst to understand. That will invoke the Guru as well, because the Guru by nature prefers to abide in the self in the inner silence. To come to the level of the physical body and have to communicate is a struggle for her. To speak about the supreme truth is something she does not want to do. Speech distorts truth. She does not want to distort truth because her speech and mind are established in the inner experience of the truth. In the case of a perfect master, she has to create an ego to speak and to teach. But when the Guru speaks, she speaks out of her own experience. That is what she puts into words. Her words do not distort the truth. To make the Guru speak, the disciple, the devotee, or whatever questioner should put forth sincere questions. They should be guided by the quest to know. Before a serious seeker, the Guru cannot remain silent. She must speak. The brahmachari's head still rested on Amma's shoulder. As she gently lifted his head, she eased his mind further by clarifying what she was saying. "Therefore, son, you don't have to worry about the question you put forth. That was a sincere and spontaneous question. Don't be sad." So Amma's soothing words consoled the brahmachari. And then another brahmachari made a remark. "If one can lie on Amma's shoulder for such a long time, I would also like to ask a sincere question." Everybody laughed, and Amma also burst into a delightful laughter. She kept on laughing for a while as the atmosphere began to lighten up. So, just as chapter 2 contains the essence in the beginning, chapter 18 contains the essence in the end. Though all important ideas from the previous chapters are provided in this chapter, there is no systematic development of the ideas, so we have to just accept the fact that it's kind of going here and there. As mentioned, the chapter begins with Arjuna's question, followed by Krishna's response in verse 2 to 6, by differentiating between sannyasa and tyaga. He also provides the views of some others to show the subtle differences between these two words, sannyasa and tyaga. Don't worry, we'll get there. You'll understand, very soon what it means. These views that he shared say that sannyasa means renunciation of actions, while tyaga means relinquishment of the fruit of actions, not the actual actions. It is a subtle difference, but to Lord Krishna, they both basically mean the same thing, which is renunciation. So in verses 7 to 12, he talks about 3 different types of sannyasa and glorifies sattvic sannyasa. And in Krishna's view, sattvic sannyasa means adhering to your own dharma, adhering to your daily obligatory duties, but renouncing the attachment and concern for that fruit, not relinquishing the action itself. So let's say you have a family, you're doing the same thing for your family, you're not relinquishing that, you're relinquishing the fruit of it. If you have some personal interest or your vested interest in whatever you're doing, then you have to try to surrender that to Amma, to God. That is Krishna's and also Amma's version of true renunciation. So, from verse 13 to 18, in 6 verses, Krishna condenses the Jnana Yoga teachings from chapters 5, 6, 13, 14, and 15. Remember, Jnana Yoga means the path of knowledge. So it's basically the essence of Vedanta is what we're talking about. The main idea he emphasizes is that the self, or Atman, never does any actions, nor does it receive the karmic result of any actions. Because at the time of the war, the beginning of the war, Arjuna was really worried about, doing something that he shouldn't do for the karmic repercussions and all that. And Krishna had already wiped that, confusion from Arjuna's mind. It is only when we identify with the body that we become the doer, so to speak, and thus experience the karmic results. This was explained in the chapters 13, 14, 15. So you can revisit that if you want to understand or remember that. That is what is meant by ahamkara, that sense of I. And that's described very clearly in the Gita, that it's only when we identify with this mind and body and etc. that we not only get that karma, but also have a lot of confusion in our lives. In the next 22 verses, which is 19 to 40, Krishna approaches 6 topics. We're still talking about chapter 18, this is a preview, okay? Those 6 topics are knowledge, action, the doer, intellect, firmness, and happiness. This is going to be very helpful for all of us. Those 6 topics are then divided into sattva, rajas, and tamas like so many times before. Naturally, the goal of this method is to show us that we should always choose sattva in every instance. So let's say it's somebody who's active in the world. What should they do? They should try to stick to sattvic actions. They shouldn't do anything that hurts other people or takes other people's resources away. An intellectual person should pursue sattvic knowledge that increases the sattva guna within their mind. Even the pursuit of pleasure could be guided in the same way, because there are such things as sattvic pleasures, like healthy and tasty food, but in moderation, and so on. There's many examples of sattvic pleasures, but it's just a few samples. Don't focus on pleasure. You can apply this concept to anything. That's why we're explaining it this way. In the language of chapter 16, Sattva would be called Daivi, remember, divine, the divine wealth, while Rajas and Tamas would be called Asuri, demonic qualities. Thus, the ideas of chapter 14, 16, and 17 are condensed into this portion. That means between verses 19 and 40. Then, from verses 41 to 48, Krishna talks about Karma Yoga, containing the essence of the third chapter. And this is where he talks about the dharma of 4 types of minds. In Sanskritam, it is called varna. Now, varna really means color. And somewhere along the way, probably during the colonial time, it was used to pit Indians against Indians, and they called it the caste society. But the original meaning of varna is the color of somebody's mind. So if you see a child who is very quiet and just likes to sit quietly and is naturally drawn to puja and things like that, this shows whether it doesn't matter what kind of family they're born into, they are more likely to become sort of the priestly people in the society. They like to meditate anyhow. They'll do some kind of sacrifices and pujas and things like that. It's just natural to them. And the same thing goes for people who want to be in the military or they want to be in civil service. These would be the kshatriyas. And once again, it doesn't matter what family you're born into, your mind determines the occupation you pursue. So, Lord Krishna shows that karma yoga is nothing but doing one's own dharma, your swadharma, as dictated by your mind, not anything else. It doesn't matter the family or what you're doing right now. If you find that your real calling is something else, that's also okay. But the qualities of your mind should determine your path. And we should do it as an offering to the Lord. Or we can say we're doing it for Amma, surrendering it to her. No matter what the form is. And when we say we're offering it to God, where is that God? Later in this chapter, Krishna says that the Lord dwells in the hearts of all beings. So it's easy for us to identify with that because we always feel like we want Amma to abide in us, or we want to be aware of the reality that she is already within us. So this means that we too should invoke God, Amma, in our heart, converting our heart into a temple. It also means that we do not compare our dharma with others' dharma because we already have our own dharma. We don't judge people's dharma as being good or bad. Just think swadharma, my duty, that's all that matters. And because that is always sacred, whether it is child rearing, whether it is military service, manual labor, a scholarship, doesn't matter. Because no matter who it may be, no matter what path it is, everybody's actions are only useful for one thing, spiritual speaking, and that is inner purification. So you could be a butcher, and still, if you have some way of, making that an offer, I know sounds kind of crazy, but there are stories in the Puranas about people who have very lowly, so-called lowly occupations, but they have innocence, and then they worship God with whatever they know to do. And then God appears before them. So it doesn't matter, really, the content. Are we offering it to God? And that's what Krishna is saying. We should, because that's how we get the purification. And here I'm going to share a quote from Amma about swadharma, your own natural dharma. It's part of a conversation. A devotee asked Amma a question about sannyasa, actually. And Amma said, sannyasa is not child's play. It needs tremendous courage born out of sense control. It is enough for a married person to look after his wife and 2 children, but a sannyasin has to carry the burden of the whole world. In the middle of the conversation, a devotee lawyer also arrived and sat with Amma. Hearing Amma's words, he raised a problem concerning his own mind and life. The lawyer said, "What is our fate, Amma?" He's referring to the legal profession. We're walking around getting involved in court cases, quarrels and lies and so many things. Amma says, "That is all right, son. It's the dharma of a lawyer to argue for his client in a lawsuit. That's not wrong. A lawyer is only performing his duty when he defends his client, even if it is a murder trial. Of course, accept only truthful cases as far as possible. The sin does not go to the lawyer if the criminal is found innocent due to the lawyer's arguments. The criminal is only getting saved from the court of law. He can never escape from God's court. One must face the fruit of one's actions, come what may." Like others, a lawyer can also come to spirituality. She's saying it like it's a big surprise. Even lawyers can. I'm just kidding. Even my own father was a lawyer, so I'm not criticizing the profession. Just the way she said it is humorous. Like others, a lawyer can also come to spirituality, abandoning world life after the dawn of real dispassion has blossomed within him. Until then, swadharma, one's own dharma, should be performed, dedicating everything to God. Then next, from verse 49 to 54, Krishna returns to the topic of Jnana Yoga. This time, though, he emphasizes meditation, or you can say contemplation. So that means it's a condensation of chapter 6, which was Dhyana Yoga, or the yoga of meditation. Earlier in the chapter, he's talking about Jnana Yoga from the standpoint of discerning the self and the non-self, the eternal and the non-eternal. So at that time, Krishna was providing, these quotes from chapters 2, 4, 5, and 13 to 15. Here, though, in this latter part of the chapter, 49 to 54, it's more of like a meditation yoga, or the meditative side of Jnana Yoga. Then, from verse 55 to 62, Krishna emphasizes the importance of bhakti, devotion, which is the essence of chapters 7 to 12. That's the whole entire middle section of the Gita. So whether it is karma yoga, upasana, which means like rituals, or jnana yoga, the path of knowledge, it must be based on devotion, bhakti. These are the points that he makes. And with the support of bhakti, Krishna says that spiritual growth will be smooth. With your mind thus given to me, you shall, by my grace, overcome all obstacles. Krishna also gives a warning: if from egotism you don't listen, you shall perish. Now here it doesn't mean literally, it just means if you go away from spirituality, away from your true self, you're as good as dead. As a human being, that's the main thing we should do, is know who we are, realize God. If you go the opposite way, then there's no point in being a human being. If we act according to our svabhava and have devotion to God, moksha or liberation is possible. Thus, all of the previous chapters have been condensed. Karma yoga, jnana yoga, Nididhyasanam, which means very deep meditation. Bhakti, values, everything. Now, having condensed all of the previous 16 chapters, not chapter 1, right? Krishna again condenses everything from verse 63 to 66. You can call it a recondensation, if you will. It is here that we find two very important verses, verse 65 and 66. Give your mind to me, be devoted to me, worship me, bow down to me. Thus you shall reach me. Truly do I promise to you, for you are very dear to me. Relinquishing all your dharmas, take refuge in me alone. I will absolve you of all sins. Worry not. As explained before, chapter 18 begins with Arjuna's final question, another question about sannyasa. Throughout the Gita, Arjuna is very interested in sannyasa because he felt like running away on the battlefield. But only at that moment. Before he had no problem because he was fighting demons that he didn't like. Now he's in a predicament because he's seeing people that he likes. So he wants to run away. He hoped Krishna would approve of his not fighting in the name of sannyasa. I'm going to become a sannyasi now, and then I'm not going to fight. And he said things in chapters 2 and 3, things like this. You might not remember, so I'm just reminding you. How shall I fight Bhishma and Drona with arrows on the battlefield? They are worthy of reverence. It is certainly better to live on alms in this world than to slay these noble-minded masters. For though they are desirous of gain, having killed them, I will enjoy nothing but blood-stained pleasures in this world. If you consider knowledge superior to action, then why do you spur me to this terrible deed? You think Krishna was fooled? No. If he spoke anything about sannyasa, it was not external renunciation, but what is called jnana karma sannyasa, which means internal renunciation while living in the family and society. Now, Amma has said some things about this very topic, jnana karma sannyasa. It's beautiful the way she puts it. Don't waste your energy thinking of the fruit. That's the hard part, right? It must come if your effort is sincere and intense. This is the important line. One must forget the fruit of the action if one really wants to get the full benefit of it. Patience and self-surrender are very necessary for an aspirant. Then a devotee asks, shouldn't a monk stay away from the world? Since he has renounced the world, how can he get engaged in mundane affairs again? Then Amma said, sannyasa is not renouncing the world and action. Tyaga, see, it's interesting that even Amma is using tyaga and sannyasa almost the same. And this is the confusion that arose in Arjuna's mind because Krishna was mixing them up. But this, anyhow, she's Krishna, so she's going to say the way she said in the Gita. Tyaga is renunciation of the fruits of action. Not renouncing the world per se, and not renouncing action. Then she says, it is the dharma of sannyasis to lead the world. I mean, she's probably talking about herself. She knows that we're just trying and we're not going to lead the world, but she's showing why she has become so active, because somebody has to show the world the proper path. Sannyasis are the ones who give peace to the world. She's the only sannyasi in the whole world. In truth, if you go by the strict definition of a sannyasi, she's the only sannyasi in the universe. Sannyasis are the one who gives peace to the world, And we know that that's exactly what she's doing. To Arjuna's question at the beginning of chapter 5, Lord Krishna replies, renunciation is indeed hard to attain without yoga, meaning without a long period of practice. The sage who is intent on yoga comes to Brahman without long delay. It's kind of a pep talk for Arjuna, because he's telling him, no, you're not going to become a sannyasi, but if you stay and keep doing what you're doing, someday you'll reach that. So it's like external sannyasa is difficult to follow. So I think it's better for you to continue as a householder. Don't forget, Arjuna had 4 wives and 4 sons. 1 son from each wife. So what happens if he goes to the Himalayas and leave, 5,000 years ago, that's a tragedy for the 4 wives. The society didn't recognize that kind of thing. So Krishna never says, renounce your family and go to the Himalayas. He never says, renounce all your worldly duties. Because Amma doesn't say that either. So we can imagine that Arjuna was really shocked when he got that rejection to his pleas to just leave the battlefield and become a sannyasi. And it took him maybe 15 or 16 chapters to get the gumption up to ask one more time. So Arjuna asks yet another question, which begins chapter 18. And let's see what that question was. At the beginning of each chapter, we have to chant a few extra words. Actually, they're in Sanskrit, so if you cannot read Devanagari, you can just repeat after me. Om Ata Ashtadashodhyayaha Moksha Sannyasa Yogaha Arjuna Uvacha Sannyasasya Mahabaho Tattvam Ichchami Veditum Tyagasya Tyagasya cha, let's go that way. Tyagasya cha Rishikesha Pratakeshi Nishodana. Now let us chant from Arjuna Uvacha together, slowly. Arjuna Uvacha. No, together. Sannyasasya mahabaho tattvam ichchami veditum Tyagasya cha hrishikesha pratakeshi nishodana. You can see the meaning on the screen. I made only one minor change. I took the word O mighty armored and brought it to the beginning, just for make it easier to understand and follow. Arjuna said, O mighty armed. There's no Sri Krishna in the actual words of the of the verse, so I just skipped that. Arjuna said, O mighty armed, I wish to know severally the truth of sannyasa as also of tyaga, O slayer of Keshi. So, I'm just taking a little bit of the commentaries of Shankaracharya and Jnaneshwar. Shankaracharya makes some clarifications about the words in the verse, and he makes 3 distinctions. I wish to know, he says, that means I desire to understand. It's not like know it as information, right? And when he says severally, it means as differentiated from each other. What is the difference between sannyasa and the difference between tyaga and sannyasa? And the third point, he says, when Arjuna says truth, he means the essential nature of that which is connoted by the terms sannyasa and tyaga. So it's not just like a simple definition. He wants to know what is the essential nature and what is that's the connotation that I need to know to understand the difference between the two. Then he says, the words samnyasa and tyaga have been mentioned here and there in the preceding chapters, but their connotations have not been ascertained. Therefore, with a view to define them conclusively, clearly distinguishing their significance, the Lord will address Arjuna in the next verse, obviously. Jnaneshwar says, at this, Lord Krishna said that the 2 words do have distinct meanings. O Arjuna, to your mind, sannyasa and tyaga appear to have one and the same meaning. It is a fact that both the words convey the sense of relinquishment. The only reason for the distinction is that discarding activeness completely is sannyasa, while abandoning only the fruit of action is tyaga. Now listen clearly about the actions in which only the fruit should be relinquished, and of others in which actions themselves should be relinquished. That means it's not going to come in this verse, it's going to come in the following verses. The day-to-day and occasional actions take place in the natural course, and when done without any personal motive, they do not bind the doer karmically. Just gives a little hint of what's coming later. So, we can say that the traditional understanding of sannyasa is that the person drops all duties and renounces the family and then lives on alms. And that was also Arjuna's understanding. But in the Gita, Krishna never uses the word sannyasa in that sense. And that probably is what elicited the curiosity in Arjuna. What is the true meaning of sannyasa? He must have been confused. Even in chapter 18, Krishna does not use that traditional sense of, abandoning the whole world. Now we can imagine that Shankaracharya, he was very traditional, and it was 1200 years ago at least. So he takes a very traditional stance. He says that true sannyasa is the traditional version of it. That means you shave your head, leave everything, and go to the forest. And that's the meaning of sannyasa in the Vedas as well. So he interprets it literally. And for all intents and purposes, the culture in 19th century India was probably a lot more like the ancient Vedic culture than today's culture. So maybe it fit for Shankaracharya and his locale. When a question arises about how to interpret or apply a particular teaching, like this interpretation of the word sannyasa, India has a very helpful system for sorting things out. It is said that there are 3 sources of spiritual wisdom. The various ways in which wisdom is transmitted across generations. They are Number 1, Shruti. Number 2, Smriti. Number 3, Shishtachara. So Shruti means the Vedas. So that's easy to understand. Smriti means the teachings of sages over the ages. And 500 years from now, Amma's teachings will fall in the category of Smriti. For us, it's like our own personal Veda anyhow. But for others, it might become like that. And then Shishtachara is the life example displayed by self-realized beings. Now, the one that has the most authority is obviously the Vedas. The Vedas are always considered to be the highest. And of the Vedas, it's really only the Upanishads that we should be looking at in the context of Vedanta. But it is the third factor, the life example displayed by self-realized beings, that is most decisive. This is because the interpretation and application of wisdom teachings has to be understandable to people, and it must suit the culture of that day and locale. So when we feel that there may be a discrepancy between Shruti, Smriti, and Shishtachara, we must turn to the living embodiment of the Vedas. In our case, that is Amma. So I'll give you an example how Amma corrects her disciples, especially ones who had this idea that sannyasa is the highest thing that they could possibly do in life. Some people come to Amma just because they just love her so much and they just want to be with her. But in the beginning, her disciples were just so full of vairagya, of dispassion, that if you talk about sannyasa, it's like the highest thing they could possibly attain at that time. So at that time, Amma would give them a lot of instructions, and she'd throw in the word sannyasi, which says if you want to be a sannyasi, you have to live like this. So even though she's not wearing sannyasa robes, she doesn't need them, they know that, and she is teaching them how to be a real sannyasi. And now Amma uses a lot of her time in managing her institutions, because that's what the world needs now. There's so many people are suffering. You can't just ignore the suffering of the masses just because you want to, sit all day, or you just want to, read books all day. She says you have to, help the suffering people. But in these times, really, they were kind of landlocked. They didn't have any money. They couldn't travel anywhere. So all they could do was build up more huts and, feed people. So they had a lot of construction projects, in the early days of the ashram. So this story is taking place in that background. The work of building the brahmacharis' huts was still continuing. And there was no water. Many times there, even after I got there was many times when there was no water. You had to walk like 10, 15 minutes just to get a bucket of water to wash your clothes. So there was no water to mix the cement for the floors, so you can't do any construction. So you have to go a long ways away. Sometimes you had to go to the other side of the river to get water. And Amma was doing it too, of course. So she was bringing a big pitcher of water into the ashram. And as she was carrying the pitcher on her hip, as they do, she noticed that one of the brahmacharis, who had just finished washing his clothes, was about to throw away the remaining detergent water from the bucket after taking out his wet clothes. And this was just for washing one dhoti. Noticing this, Amma said to the brahmachari, "You children have no shraddha at all, no focus at all, no awareness at all. You have not been through any difficulties. You are wasting things like this because you have yet to know what real suffering is. You must have alertness in each and everything. Don't waste this much detergent for only one dhoti. This can be used to wash other clothes also. Sannyasis should not waste anything. In this way, the value of each thing will be understood. So it's just a bucket of water. And Amma's carrying water, he's carrying water. The difference is that she is willing to make more sacrifice to go a long ways away and then bring it for the construction, not for herself. This person is taking the same water and wasting it. So this is Amma's version of sannyasa. It's our sacrifice helps the rest of the world. And so from the context of the Mahabharata, which is where the Bhagavad Gita comes from, it is really clear that Arjuna was not at all prepared for sannyasa, which is fine. 99.9% of the people in the world are not ready. I think many of us who are wearing robes are, sometimes feel like we're not prepared either, but Amma gave anyhow. It's her blessing, her grace, that's all. So there is no way that Krishna would have suggested or even recognized the path of sannyasa for Arjuna. He wasn't prepared. For one who is still preparing himself, the solution is to practice the spirit of sannyasa as much as one can. And Amma says we should live in the world, try to reduce attachment, perform all of our duties, our swadharma, sincerely, try to renounce selfishness in all of our actions. And she says that's how householders practice renunciation. A devotee asked Amma about sannyasa. And then Amma said, whether you are a spiritual seeker or a sannyasin, you're still living in the world, aren't you? Therefore, you have certain duties towards society. Of course, nothing binds a true sannyasin, so she's not bound. But since most people are not sannyasins, they should play their part well in the world. Do some good and beneficial things for society, but try to be detached. As a person who leads a spiritual life while leading a family life, prepare yourself for the final letting go. Amma, how is this possible? Asked the same devotee. Amma continued to explain. Whether one is a householder or a sannyasin, renunciation is the means to the end. Is it? Think about it. Just really think about your life and you'll have to agree with her. Internally, a householder should be a sannyasin. Externally, he should be active, performing his duties neatly and well. Externally, he has desires and needs to fill. He may need acquisitions and possessions, but at the same time, he should prepare himself to drop everything at any time. A sannyasin who lives in the world should also be like this. He should be dynamic in his actions, but untouched and totally detached within. That is the secret. A sannyasin is one who has dedicated his entire life, both external and internal, for others, for the good of the world. Whereas a real householder is one who still leads the family life externally, but a sannyasi's life internally. In order to set an example, a sannyasin also should perform actions while living in the world. This is what Amma is doing. He should not sit idle saying, oh, I have attained the state of actionlessness, therefore I don't have to do any work. This will set the wrong example and others will follow. Even after attaining the state of perfection, a true sannyasi who lives in this world of pluralities will be very dynamic, active, and creative on the outside. But she will be totally silent within. And this is why Arjuna gets confused about the two words, sannyasa and tyaga. So he asked Krishna to point out the differences to them. I want to know distinctly the true meaning of sannyasa and the true meaning of Tyaga. And now Krishna begins his answer next week. And if you didn't know, you can submit questions. I think the gap was so long that people didn't submit any questions, but if you want to know what that, do we have the email address that we could put in the chat window? Hopefully. It should be there even after this recording is over. You should be able to access it and send a question through a Google form. Can be about the context or the content or whatever it is. So usually I save some time to the end for the questions, but we didn't have any this time, so we will have a nice long meditation instead. So what we do is we conclude with 2 ending prayers, and then we will have a brief meditation. If you have time, you can join us, and we will have some quiet time and try to assimilate these teachings. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu Om Shanti 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 Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om. So let us meditate together for some time. Close your eyes. Check your posture. Take a few long, deep breaths. With each and every long, deep breath, you feel your body and mind relax further and further. Feel Amma's subtle presence all around you. Feel that you are already in her embrace. You feel the warm love that she showers us with. Now gradually shift your focus to the rhythmic flow of your breathing process. Continue to breathe deeply and peacefully, but remain as a witness to that flow. Simply watching the flow of the air as it goes in and out. As we observe the breathing process, the mind becomes more and more subtle, enabling us to visualize even more. Visualize Amma's form in your heart. As Lord Krishna will say in this chapter, the Lord abides in our heart. We can make all of our actions an offering to that inner Amma, or your beloved deity. But only if we have the right approach. If we want our actions to be an offering, we have to make that resolve each time. What I am about to do May the world benefit. May humanity, may nature, may all beings benefit. I too may benefit, but that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because it's my dharma. And because I want to serve. I want to offer to the world like Amma does. In that way, our efforts and the sankalpa are offered to Amma. And whatever comes to us is her prasad. Now, to put it in context, try to remember a few things you did recently. And imagine if you did not offer those to Amma mentally or to the world. Imagine how it would have felt if you had. How different it would have been. Take a few moments to visualize that. Now, let us visualize something we have to do soon. It could be tomorrow, this week, whatever it is. Try practicing that offer to Amma. Try to make that task or action or whatever it is an offering to Amma mentally, even now, in advance. If you want a new job, you can mentally offer it to Amma. This is not just from me, for my pleasure. I want to use this job to help the world. Whatever it may be, try to find a way to connect it to Amma and a way you can offer it to her or to your beloved deity. Let us take a few moments to visualize that too. as you visualize yourself offering your actions to Amma or to God or to your beloved deity, feel the weight, the burden taken away from your shoulders, and feel a deep, abiding peace in your heart. It is handed over to the divine. And in the process, we are purified. It brings so much peace of mind. Let us immerse ourselves in that for some time. Now let us conclude with the final prayer. Take a deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnaad Purnamadachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om. One more long deep breath. And as you breathe out, you can slowly open your eyes. Om Namah Shivaya, thank you for joining us. We intend to have the Gita class again next week, same time, and we will have Amma's birthday celebration on October 31st, on October 1st, and a lot of other cultural celebrations coming up this month and next month. So I'm not sure how many of them will be online, but Gita class will be online. So otherwise you can join us in person. Om Namah Shivaya.